Welcome to episode 78 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, all spelled out, so seven health.com/78.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey guys, welcome back to another installment of Real Health Radio. My name's Chris Sandel, I'm the host. It's another episode where I'm sitting down with a guest, and I'll go through that with you shortly, but just a little bit of housekeeping to start with. And the housekeeping is to mention that I'm currently taking on new clients, and I've been doing this now for the last 3 weeks, and I have just 4 slots left. So if you're interested in finding out more about working together, you can head over to www.7, all spelled out, so seven-health.com/help. So the word help, HELP. And this will take you to a page that explains the process of us working together. And at the bottom of that page, there's a link to apply for a free initial chat. And this is how I work by having this chat with people to find out what's going on, what they want help with, to see if we are a good fit for one another. And I should say that the consults are done via Skype or FaceTime or even by a phone. So the fact that you may not live in the UK like I do isn't a problem. And actually the bulk of my clients are now overseas. So US, Canada, Australia, Germany, etc. So if 2017 is the year that you want to finally deal with certain health issues, or there's body issue stuff, or disordered eating, or really the long list of topics that I deal with as part of this podcast, then get in contact. And the address again is www.7-health.com/help. So getting on with today's show. So the guest for this week is Chris Masterjohn, PhD. So Chris earned his PhD in Nutritional Sciences from the University of Connecticut in the summer of 2012. He then served as a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Illinois, and then served as an assistant professor of health and nutrition sciences at Brooklyn College. And in the fall of 2016, Chris made the decision to leave academia and pursue this from January time this year, and he's now been running his own business and doing his own thing. And this includes conducting independent research, doing consulting, working on information products, collaborating on information and technology products, and just producing tons of free content to help people gain better health. And Chris has a deep and personal experience with the power of food, with movement, and with mindfulness to support health and well-being, and he wants to take what he's learned and pay it forward. And he's doing this by taking complex science and translating it into practical principles that each of us can use to better support our health. So I've been following Chris's work for the last 6 or 7 years. I think I don't know exactly when it was, but I first came across him back when he was writing for the Weston A. Price Foundation. I don't know if he still does that, but he used to either have a monthly article or a quarterly article that he would do for them, and I'd always read them. And he was someone whose name was popping up a lot with online summits, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago as well. And whenever I'd see his name, I would always tune into the talks because he's just so knowledgeable and has a really great way of explaining things. But it's really been in this last year that he's been putting out a huge amount of content, and I've been consuming that so much more. And he's started his own podcast called The Daily Lipid, and I think I've listened to every single episode of it. And more recently, he started to create more blog posts and really good videos, etc. So when I got in contact and asked if he wanted to be on the show, I was super excited when he responded and said yes. So this show is really looking at 2 topics in a lot of detail. So we first just started talking about Chris's background, etc. But then the 2 areas that we focus on are areas that he has a lot of expertise in. And the first is vitamin K2 and its importance for health and the body. And the second is oxidants and antioxidants. And it's this second topic that most people are completely confused about. And Chris has a real great way of explaining what is really happening in the body and why our simplistic model of oxidants are bad and antioxidants are good is not only outdated, it's simply not true in those black and white terms. So on Chris's own podcast, I feel he can definitely get into the real minute details, and I imagine there's probably sections of the audience, if they're lay people or new to health, where it could be a little difficult to follow. But I think Chris did a really great job with this, with keeping it at a level that everyone is going to be able to understand and follow. One thing I do want to mention is when I recorded this, it appears I made some error with my mic. So the external mic that I normally use, which has very good sound quality, must have been on mute or something went wrong. So my side of the conversation was picked up by my Mac laptop's internal microphone. So my side of the conversation is much tinier than it usually would be. We're up to nearly episode 80 of the podcast, and so far, like touch wood, I've never had any sound issues. So something like this was bound to happen, and it's a pretty minimal thing in the whole scheme of things. So just if you're listening and wondering why it sounds like I'm speaking down a hall, it's because something went wrong with the mic and it's just been recorded on my Mac. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the interview. Here is my conversation with Chris Masterjohn, PhD. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Good to be here.
Cool. So look, there's probably a lot of my audience who know who you are, but also lots who don't. Do you want to give, just as a start, a bit of a backstory about yourself, describing what you're doing now, but also the different parts that maybe led up to that?
Sure. So right now what I do is a number of things that all center around taking complex science and breaking it down into information that is practically useful for people to improve their health. And so I do that in a number of ways that include consulting, that include making information products, that include video-based lessons and quick tips and things like that, all through my site, chrismasterjohnphd.com, and my podcast, which is hosted there but can be found in any podcast app, The Daily Lipid. And I went down this path mainly because I had a number of really incredible experiences for better and worse along my journey, realizing the powerful impact that diet can have. Yeah. And, as I went along in my journey, realizing that diet isn't everything. So I had the first really profound experience for me was when I became a vegan, expecting that to do wonders for my health, and finding quite the opposite happened. Then I discovered the principles of traditional diets and the importance of nutrient-dense foods, and that really created a revolution for me in terms of turning around my mental and physical health. And then I went on a long path trying to pay forward the things that I'd learned in that experience. I was going to go to medical school, but I wound up going into nutritional research. And then, I had the next set of experiences, which caused me to learn about other things that are just as important as diet. For example, if you work yourself, if you overwork yourself, which, me being the kind of personality that I have, and then going into graduate school is kind of a recipe for me, not sleeping enough, working too much, being on the computer too much. And I kind of learned through that period that I have to pay just as much attention to sleeping and stress management and fitness and all of that. So I've learned a lot along the path. I got a PhD in Nutritional Sciences in 2012. I did a postdoc for a couple of years after that. And for 2.5 years, I was assistant professor of health and nutrition sciences at Brooklyn College in Brooklyn, New York. Just in the last couple of months, I've left academia just because I find that working on my own just makes me a lot happier. So I'm really happy with what I'm able to do and the level at which I'm able to scale it. And that brings me to where I am now.
Cool. And just one of the things that you mentioned there, and it's something I talk a lot with clients, is that, yeah, lifestyle factors are incredibly important. I think there's that adage that you can't outrun a poor diet, and I think the opposite is also true. Like there is no diet that you can eat that is going to outrun lack of sleep and lack of socializing and all the other poor lifestyle habits that a lot of people have. So yeah, I think you said you experienced that just from overworking.
Yeah, and I think we all come at this with a bias that's shaped from our previous experience. Yeah. And so if your most powerful experience is about the impact that diet had on you, it can be very easy for you to develop blinders that see diet as more important than everything else. The reason that it was more important for you is just because that was what your weakest link was at that time. In that context, your story could have been a little bit different, and exercise or social, or your social environment or whatever else could have been that weakest link, and then you would have come forward from that with a different set of blinders. And so I think that it's very important for us to be conscious of the fact that whatever we got the most out of in the past isn't necessarily what we're going to get the most out of in the future. All that it takes is for your life to change in just the right set of ways. And what worked for you in the past may be different from what's going to work for you in the future, or what was the most important place to put your focus will be different in the future.
Yeah. And I think that's important, because what often happens is that when things then aren't working, people double down on the thing that's worked for them before, and actually in that moment, that's not what they really need. They need something else.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I know you've said you've had, from other interviews I've heard and from other things I've read that you'd written when you were doing your PhD, that it wasn't great from a health perspective because of the kind of work you're doing and the hours and being in the lab and all that kind of stuff. Do you think you can do that kind of a qualification like a PhD and still retain your health, or it's just the nature of the beast that while you're doing that, health goes on the back burner and there's just no way around it? It's unavoidable.
I think there's a certain extent to which some of these tasks are just much larger responsibilities than what we might face if we're not pursuing them. However, if you're conscious of the pitfalls that you can make, then you just have to you just have to be protective of your own health. Yeah. And you have to go into it valuing, you have to go into it recognizing that if I'm not careful, I may wind up sleeping for 3 hours a night, and that's not going to be good for me. And so you have to be proactive about protecting that space. And whenever you do work like that, particularly if it involves, many of us have our work defined by the number of hours we work. So we go in at 9, we come out at 5, and that's the end of that. If your work is based more on the tasks that you do, which is the case in graduate school, right? You have certain research aims, you have certain publication aims, and there no one's judging whether you did a good job by whether you stayed till 5 o'clock. They're judging whether you did a good job by whether you actually do those things. So you wind up your commitments wind up being open-ended, and no one except you knows exactly how much work you're putting into it. Like you have someone who's supervising you, and they can guess the burden that they're putting on you, but they're not living in your shoes and inside your head, and they don't know what hours you're putting in. And, by definition, if you're on a research team and you're doing research by definition means you don't know how long it's going to take, and you don't know what you're going to find. Otherwise, it wouldn't be research. Yeah. So what that means is if you have a mentor or an advisor who's saying, go research this thing, at best, they can only guess how long that would take, because if they had already done that task, they wouldn't have given it to you, right? So if you don't communicate, then one thing that you have to be really careful of in jobs like these is being a yes man, because if you are afraid to communicate your own needs and you just take on whatever tasks people are giving you, they're going to read that as you have capacity to do more tasks. And if every time someone gives you a new task, you say, yep, I can do that. Yep, I can do that. And you don't say, well, yes, I can do that if I don't sleep this week. Then they have no way to calibrate whether the task that they're giving you is reasonable or what you need for resting and recharging. So it's just a matter of speaking up and communicating and being, the other thing is, when you're young, you think that you can get by on a lot less sleep than you actually can get by on. Yeah. And what you don't realize is that after you get by on so little sleep for 3 to 5 years, it may take you 3 to 5 years to recover from that. So I think it's a matter of knowing. It's a matter of not being stupid enough to think that you're invincible. And it's a matter of being protective of those boundaries and communicating about, what you're capable of doing and what you're capable of taking on.
And how have you found that now with transitioning into like running your own business? Because everything you've described there, I mean, I know when I was first starting out, and even now, like, there really is no reason for me to stop working. Like, I can always be working on something. Every day there is stuff that is left undone and unfinished. And so I think even just running your own business, there's that tendency to just continue working and working and working. So have you been able to find a better balance? And I'm asking this as well because I see the amount of content that you put out. And so I'm just imagining there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes and a lot of time spent with that stuff.
Sure. Well, I think it depends what stage you're in. So when you're producing content, what you need to do is establish systems and empower other people to help you run those systems. And so that would be a disaster if you didn't put in the work to put the systems in place to get the output that you want. You can't just hire random people and say, go, run this thing, or else it's not going to come out the way that you want. Yeah. So I think it takes a lot, generally when I'm putting out content, I have to put in a lot of overtime to figure out the way everything that should be done. And then I have to put in even more overtime to teach other people to take on the tasks that I'm not critical to. And then that, relieves time where you can use it to rest and recharge, or you can use it for leisure, or you can use it for the next big thing that you're going to put out. And I think, I'm in the position now where I'm really excited with the stuff that I'm doing. And so I'm generally, whenever that time is freed up, I'm using it to develop the next big thing I'm putting out. But I just have to be conscious of, I have to listen to my body, and I have to be constantly reevaluating my priorities and so on. I think when you're doing your own thing, you can get by burning the candle at both ends a little bit more in a little bit different way, because the pleasure you get out of having built your own thing is in a way nourishing to your body in a way that doing something for someone else or because someone else wanted you to do it is not.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
But it's it's still the case that it's still the case that, just as you said, there is no borderline between your work and your personal life if you're working out of your home and if you're defining your own hours and so on. So for me, I find that I find kind of two opposite things for me. So first of all, if I wouldn't have even have been able to get to the point where I could start doing things in my own business if I didn't first take a month off of everything. Like, I had gotten to a point the summer before this past summer where I was so burnt out that I took the first true vacation that I'd taken in a decade, and I didn't bring my computer, and I made a rule for myself that, like, I disabled my email on my phone, and I made a rule for myself that I would only check my email from a what do you call those? From a computer cafe, from an internet cafe. Yeah, that's right. And so I went to an internet cafe once at the midpoint of my trip, and I checked my email once. And when I got back from that, I was really recharged to, really start taking on things. And so there's a sense in which this past year I've been working like crazy, and most people would think what I'm doing is harmful to myself, but it's kind of like there's a season for working, there's a season for relaxing. And if I try to define my work as, I'm going to put 8 hours in each day because that's what's healthy, then I wind up in a position where I never accomplish anything, because it's not about the time, it's about the momentum.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the biggest things that I put out most recently was the ultimate vitamin K2 resource at chrismasterjohnphd.com/K2. That was a huge project, and I would never have gotten that out if I didn't decide, like, this 1 week I'm not going to work out and I'm going to sleep like 3 or 4 hours a night. And I needed that to get the momentum to get it out there. And then as soon as it was done, I slept a full night. I went into the gym the next day. I took it really easy for a couple days before getting back into the next thing. I think that I don't like the idea of moderation in everything. I think, unless you're going to extend that to moderation in moderation.
Yeah.
I think we really need to go through, it's sort of like there's a natural, what we've done in our modern lives is we've divorced ourselves from all the natural rhythms and from the concept of these rhythms, right? So seasons are like, it's different in the winter than in the summer. It's different in the fall than in the spring. And it's different in the afternoon than at like it should be cooler at night and warmer in the afternoon, and it's not for most of us because we just put the heat at whatever we want and leave it there all the time. Like we should go through natural rhythms where we're more creative sometimes, and sometimes we just need to take a break. But like in the United States, most people don't get that much vacation time, and they don't even use the vacation time that they have. And so they're always going in at 9, and they're always coming out at 5, and they never get a big long break. So I think if you're working on creative projects and things like that, you really need to understand where your limits are. Like, I try on most days to get 8 hours of sleep, but if I'm working on something really big, I need to know where can I stretch the rules and bend the rules, and what is the maximum amount of time where I can do that and easily snap back.
Yeah.
So I find that if I'm working on a big project, I can work 7 days a week for about 3 months at a time. And then I'll just hit a wall where I need to take 1 or 2 days off a week, or I'll just get burned out. But I can alternate in those cycles. And similarly, like I can go 3 or 4 days to get something big out where I'm not sleeping that much, but I can feel it that my body can only tolerate 3 or 4 days, and I have to get back to normal after that.
Yeah. And I think that concept of seasons is really important. And I'll have times where I'll have a number of weekends in a row where I don't get a weekend off and I'm just constantly working. And then there'll be times where it is a lot lighter. But one of the things you mentioned there was the K2 resource that you did, which is amazing. So I recommend that people go and check that out. I'm going to put it in the show notes. So go there, and I just want to chat with you about it for a little while. Like, the first thing I have to ask is like K2, like, why did you pick K2 of all the vitamins? Why K2?
Well, I think that K2 is and a couple of reasons. So first of all, it's something that in the past I've invested a disproportionate amount of my creative power into.
Okay.
And it's something that I'm best positioned to make unique contributions about. And it's also, simultaneously something that is largely neglected. So I think, everybody's talking about vitamin D. Everyone's talking about calcium. By contrast, K2 is very underappreciated. Most people could benefit to be paying a lot more attention to the K2 in their diet. Most people probably aren't getting enough. And yet far fewer people are talking about it. But also in 2007, I had written an article identifying vitamin K2 as the activator X of Weston Price. And that was one of the most important articles that I ever wrote. And it was something where I think, if you look at all the different things that I've written about, that just happens to be one of the places where I've made one of my largest creative contributions. And yet I'm not actually very well known for the contributions that I made. And the article that I wrote actually isn't that easy to find on Google and so on. So it was a way to take everything that I'd learned about how to make information accessible to people and how to make it easy to find and how to make it exciting for people, and take the creative contributions that I'd made 10 years earlier and bring them to that next level of accessibility and usability and findability. So it was that was just the opportunity to put things together that was really the low-hanging fruit, the place where I could make the biggest impact in the smallest amount of time. And to be honest, it's just a starting place. I hope to make other ultimate resources for the other nutrients as we go along, but it takes a few months to do something like that. So it'll take at this rate, it'll take a few years to do, if I were to do each one for each nutrient.
Okay, cool. And so for people who are listening who don't know much or anything about K2, what is it important for in the body? Why should people be aware of it?
Sure. So vitamin K is one of the 4 fat-soluble vitamins, and for most of the 20th century, it was mostly known for its role in blood clotting. And when we eat vitamin K in the diet, most of that vitamin K comes from green vegetables, and most of it is vitamin K1. Throughout most of the 20th century, most scientists did not pay attention to the distinction between K1 and K2 because the diet is mostly K1, and no one was really looking at its roles beyond blood clotting. Later, in the latter part of the 20th century, especially leading up to the 1990s, we realized that vitamin K actually plays important roles in bone mineralization and bone health. And then in the early 2000s, we realized that vitamin K also plays important roles in protecting against soft tissue calcification. And when you put the two of those together, what you could say is that vitamin K is helping you put calcium into all the places where it belongs, like your bones and teeth, and keep it out of all the places it doesn't belong, like your blood vessels, where it could contribute to heart disease, like your kidneys, where it could contribute to kidney stones. And even to take an interesting example that's a little bit less intuitive, it even helps you grow when you're young, because when you're little and you're going through your growth spurts in adolescence especially, your bones are getting longer and longer because of the production of new cartilage. And when your growth spurt stops and you've exhausted your ability to grow any taller, it's because that cartilage has calcified. Well, throughout that whole entire time, what's preventing the growth plates cartilage from calcifying early is vitamin K. And if you don't have enough vitamin K to prevent the growth plates from calcifying early, you won't be as tall as you could have been. So it's playing all kinds of I mean, you can take like through the lifespan, you could say in children, it's really important for proper growth. But then through the entire life, you get to old age and things like kidney stones and heart disease become super important there. And so it's constantly playing this critical role of putting calcium where it belongs and keeping it out of where it doesn't belong. What that actually does for you in terms of the benefits it provides changes throughout your life, but it's there constantly doing important things throughout your whole lifespan. And now that we've learned all these different rules, what we've realized is that actually vitamin K is a collection of different compounds, and we could crudely classify them into K1 and K2. But actually, when we talk about K2, even that is a collection of other compounds. So there's all these different types of K2, like MK4 is one type of K2, MK7 is another type. And each different compound has its own tissue distribution. So some forms of vitamin K are better at reaching the bone, some are better at reaching the blood vessels, some are better at reaching the liver, and that makes the whole class of compounds important to understand. And actually, to say that vitamin K2 is important to this or that is an oversimplification. Actually, the form of vitamin K that's mainly found in animal products, so if you're eating egg yolks, for example, or you're eating goose liver is a popular source, that's MK4. And MK4 is probably more important for nourishing your blood vessels, for example. A lot of people take supplements that are derived from natto, which is a form of fermented soybeans that's popular in Eastern Japan. That contains MK7, which MK7 is very similar in properties to MK8 and MK9, which are found in a lot of cheeses. So these forms of vitamin K that are found in fermented foods are probably much better than MK4 is at nourishing the bones. So what we find, I think, is that we really want to get a mix of all the different forms of vitamin K. And the best way to do that is to get K1 found in leafy greens, to get MK4 found in animal products, and to get MK7, 8, 9 found in fermented foods. And if we work to balance the diet in this way, then I think that's where we're really getting the maximal benefit. The reason that I called the ultimate vitamin K2 resource K2 is because that's what people are most looking for. So no one's, a lot more people are going to be looking for something about vitamin K2 than they're going to be looking at, some word like tetrahydromenaquinone 9 or something like that. So simplifying it to call it vitamin K2 is an important way of grabbing people's attention in the title, but actually in that resource there's these great fun infographics that actually explain all these greater levels of detail, where by the time someone reads through the article, even if they just look at the pictures, they should have a more sophisticated understanding of vitamin K2 than they did when they started.
Yeah, and the graphics are great. It is really easy to read through and interpret. For someone who's just listening to this and they're wanting to get their K2 to an adequate level, how much would someone need to be eating of certain foods on a daily basis or a weekly basis to get into like a healthy range with that?
I think most people want to get about 100 or 200 micrograms per day. And what that really means is emphasizing things like cheeses, things like depending on your taste, most people wouldn't want to eat natto, but some people enjoy it. Cheeses, egg yolks, dark chicken meat, things like that are the foods that people are most likely to want to use. And really you'd have to eat several ounces of cheese every day and have a few egg yolks and have some meat. So I think that I think it's actually pretty hard to get a good amount of K2 in the diet. And I think it's one of the reasons to pay so much attention to it is because I think it's one of those nutrients that has tended to be limiting. So if we look at a lot of traditional diets across cultures, I think what we find is that in some diets, they ate a lot of goose liver and they prized the goose liver because it was such an important source of K2. In other cultures, they made certain cheeses that were rich in K2 and they really prized those cheeses because they were so rich in it. In other cultures, they made natto and they really prized that natto. And so I think in modern society, we are used to a diet that, a lot of these foods that have K2 are rich in flavors that you really have to get that are really acquired tastes.
Yeah.
For example, the cheeses that are rich in K2 are also the cheeses that have the strongest smells and flavors to them. And so people who are used to eating refined diets or diets that have been designed by industry to maximize all the palatability factors and who don't have cultural traditions around, who didn't grow up from the cradle with cultural traditions about emphasizing that particular culture's source of nutrient density, we're in this position where all of these foods sound weird to us. And for many of us, it would be, we look at that and we're like, well, yeah, I could eat that cheese every once in a while, but I'm not going to eat 6 ounces a day. Yeah. Or like, yeah, I could try natto, but no, I'm not going to eat 20 grams a day. I don't want to eat that thing every day, So I think that it's, I think that most, a lot of people, I think you can reach out to the highly motivated people and you can say, yeah, try to get a few ounces of these cheeses every day and try to work in some dark meat every day and try to work in some if you're down with natto, you can just eat less than an ounce of natto every day and your diet would be loaded with K2. But on the other hand, how are you going to reach out to someone in the general population who isn't highly motivated to incorporate new foods that they didn't grow up with that have funny tastes in them? Yeah. Like in that case, it may be a hopeless cause, and you may want to tell that person eat your leafy green vegetables, and also take a supplement. So.
And with the supplements, do you think it's a good thing for most people to be taking? And is there any supplements that someone then should be taking alongside K2? So the fact that K2 is going up, it's then meaning that this other thing should also be increasing to not cause any problems?
So I think that vitamin K2 is really working in a functional network along with vitamin A, along with vitamin D, along with calcium and phosphorus and magnesium. And those are if you were to – biological complexity is like an onion. If you peel back one layer of it because that's what you see as most important, but then you just see this next layer and then this next layer and then this next layer. So really – really the whole diet is important. And I would point out, for example, if we want vitamin K to support calcium staying out of our blood vessels and going into our bones, we want vitamin K to activate a protein called MGP. And MGP is made so our cells decide how much MGP to make in response to the amount of vitamin A, the amount of vitamin D, and the amount of thyroid hormone. And vitamins A and D can't carry out their signaling roles to help cells decide how much MGP to make unless you have zinc. And you can't make MGP or any other protein if you didn't have magnesium. And once you make the MGP, the way that vitamin K activates it is to add carbon dioxide to it. You get carbon dioxide from energy metabolism, And you get a lot more carbon dioxide from carbohydrate than you get from fat. But vitamin K is a fat-soluble vitamin, so if you eat a really low-fat diet, you're not going to absorb the vitamin K from your food very well, so you have to eat fat. MGP is a protein. All of your proteins in your body are made from the raw materials that you get from dietary protein. So if you don't eat enough protein, you can't make MGP, right? So there's layer one. And so, you know, like I can point out that, so it's sort of like you could zero in on one of those interactions and say, well, it works really closely with vitamin D. And then you could say, like, try to devise a ratio of vitamin D to vitamin K. But really by zeroing in so much on that, you're losing the forest for one of the trees.
Yeah.
And you're like, the more tightly you zero in on that interaction, the more you're shooting yourself in the foot by distracting yourself from this much broader network of things going on. And so if your vitamin A status is good, your vitamin D status is good, and your zinc status is bad, then you're not going to get anything meaningful and beneficial out of trying to optimize the ratio of vitamin K2 to vitamin D. And you're going to get this huge benefit from fixing a zinc deficiency. So we could, you know, after you peel away each layer of the onion, we could find something that's even more distantly related to vitamin K metabolism. But if that thing is profoundly deficient and everything else is pretty good, then the fact that it's so distant from vitamin K metabolism doesn't matter. The fact that it's so deficient is what matters.
Yeah.
You see, like, so it could be something like iron, right? Off the top of my head, it's like iron doesn't play any really specific direct interaction with vitamin K. But if you're anemic, you're not producing cellular energy,
yeah.
right? And so if your ATP levels are down, then you can't make enough of any of the proteins. And if you don't have energy, then you can't even pump calcium into the right place in the cell, never mind if it can interact with MGP, right? So the fact that iron isn't specifically interacting with vitamin K, that doesn't mean that being anemic, like if you're anemic, then you best bet that fixing your iron is going to do way more to optimize your vitamin K metabolism than trying to tweak your vitamin D or your calcium is, just because in you, that's the weakest link.
Yeah.
So I really think that for an individual person, you absolutely do want to keep in mind that that vitamin K has important interactions with calcium and other fat soluble vitamins, and you do want to acknowledge that they work in a cooperative network, but you can't zero in on, well, the vitamin K is raising my need for this thing and that thing, and I want to calculate the ratio. You're going to get much bigger bang for the buck if you analyze in a holistic manner someone's diet and lifestyle and look for where the weakest links are. And you have to be holistic about that more than you have to be micromanaging ratios.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I mean, that was a very detailed answer to my question, so that's great. So I just want to switch to something else that you've done recently, which is a whole video series on oxidants. And I think people typically throw the words like oxidants and antioxidants and free radicals around, but from watching your video series, I'm pretty sure that most people don't really know what this stuff is about and are pretty off the mark with their beliefs.
Sure.
So I guess, do you want to just start off by talking a little bit about the antioxidant system and how this works within the body?
Sure. Well, this is another great example of where it's not about the thing you consider an antioxidant. It's about whatever the weakest link in the system is. So, but we could back up even further than that. And so I think this is an area that's just miserably shrouded in misconception after misconception.
Yeah.
And the view that most people have in popular culture is already something that I think would be widely recognized as outdated in the research community. And so let's just start on the one topic of are reactive oxygen species and free radicals bad for you? So we are used to thinking of even just the name, right? What's antioxidant? It's something that's against oxidants, right? Yeah. So if antioxidants are good, then oxidants must be bad. And going back decades into the 1980s was really when we came up with a good cohesive definition of the field of antioxidant research, where the ideas that were established were basically that oxidative stress is a key underlier of aging and of many of the degenerative diseases that we associate with aging. And oxidative stress can simply be defined as an excess of oxidants over antioxidants. And at that time, we really didn't have an appreciation of the positive roles that oxidants play in cellular physiology. So we had this simple view of oxidants bad, antioxidants good, as long as you favor the balance of antioxidants over oxidants, you'll have net goodness, and that'll protect you from, keep you young, keep you healthy, keep you vibrant, and protect you from all these degenerative diseases. What we now can appreciate is that all of these oxidants are actually playing really helpful roles in cellular physiology. So, for example, when you get fit after exercise, there are numerous reasons for this, but one of the things that exercise does is it produces oxidants. And one of the things that you do in response to that when you're refeeding and resting and relaxing and sleeping and so on is that you boost up your antioxidant capacity. But it's not just your antioxidant capacity. It's also you make more mitochondria so you can burn more energy. You make more antioxidant enzymes so you can burn that energy cleanly. So you have these whole suite of responses to the stimulus that are improving your, in this case in exercise, you're getting fitter, so you're performing better. Why are you performing better? It's all responses that are mediated by oxidants like hydrogen peroxide and stuff like that. In the thyroid gland, you can't make thyroid hormone without copious amounts of oxidants. When your immune system defends you against pathogens, it can't do that without producing copious amounts of oxidants. So oxidants are good, but if they're overproduced or they're produced in the wrong context or they're produced at the wrong time, they can cause a lot of damage. So it's not that we're dispensing with the old view that antioxidants, protect us from that damage. It's just that now we've added a more nuance to it. And what we want to be looking at is not that antioxidants are just getting rid of oxidants, but they're helping us direct oxidants into their proper health-promoting roles by limiting them into the proper amount and the proper time and the proper context. And the proper context means the proper locations and the proper times. So if you consider, for example, your immune system has to do when you're protecting yourself against an infectious disease, your immune system needs to get activated at the right time. It needs to swallow up a pathogen into a specific cellular container, and then it needs to inject hydrogen peroxide and bleach and all these other oxidants into that container where the pathogen is to destroy the pathogen. At the same time, it needs to protect itself from the hydrogen peroxide and the bleach and all the stuff that it's producing, or else it will destroy itself. So the role of the antioxidant system is to allow it to do both of those things at the same time. So antioxidants, when used properly, can actually boost our immune support because by allowing the immune cell to protect itself from hydrogen peroxide in bleach, it can then more safely produce a lot of hydrogen peroxide in bleach in order to inject it into the container where it's isolated the pathogen and destroy it. And it can actually destroy it much more effectively. To kind of make this a little bit more intelligible, we could think of like going to war against an enemy. The better your armor is, the more of a dangerous situation you can go into to be able to carry out the mission more effectively. Or you could think of like in industry, if we're making things, the better your protective gear is, the more the more versatility you have in the things that you're able to work with, and the more impressive things that you can make, because you need to be able to protect yourself to be able to carry out those functions. So just being able to see oxidants as not being bad, but being very powerful and having to be put into the right context is one major paradigm shift that we need to think about. But then the other thing is, thinking about how the system works. So the antioxidant, like people, I would say most of us tend to think of antioxidants as a handful of things like vitamin C and vitamin E and polyphenols that we get in fruits and vegetables. And a really good example of how this is misconstrued is to look at a package of frozen blueberries that has the antioxidant power of these wild blueberries listed against other foods. And what they do in those assays is they grind up the food and they put it in a dish and they mix oxidants with it, and they look at the ability of that food to quench the free radicals in the dish. That's really not at all how those foods interact in our body. In our body, those foods are providing nutrients that get incorporated into this very complex system that involves not just vitamin C and vitamin E and the polyphenols in those foods, but it also involves minerals like zinc and copper and manganese and iron and selenium. And it also involves enzymes, and it also involves glutathione, which is a substance that we derive from dietary protein. And it also involves the whole system of energy metabolism is what provides the energy that system uses to control oxidant production and to protect our cellular constituents from those oxidants. So all of the B vitamins that are involved in energy metabolism are just as important as vitamin E and vitamin C to that system. And so once again, it becomes this missing link thing, right? So if you have oxidative stress in your body and you're deficient in thiamine, which is a B vitamin involved in energy metabolism, you're going to get way more bang for the buck fixing your thiamine deficiency than you are throwing vitamin E onto the system. Because yes, your problem is oxidative stress, but if the reason for your oxidative stress is not vitamin E deficiency, then adding vitamin E is not the thing that's going to fix that system. So I think that, recognizing that it's not about good versus bad, and it's about context, and recognizing that it's not about, the other thing is each component of the system, they're not interchangeable. If you just say, vitamin C is an antioxidant, vitamin E is an antioxidant, these blueberries are rich in antioxidants, then you're talking about it as if all those things are interchangeable, and they're not. Each component has its own specific niche in the system, and that's why you can't just throw more vitamin E on the system and have it work, because those components are not interchangeable, and they're unique in the niche that they contribute. So it's just one more example where we can't get lost staring at an individual tree like vitamin E. We really have to see the forest for what it is, and that again drives us back to the need to have this holistic assessment of someone's diet and lifestyle and look for, what in you personally is the missing link, and that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck.
And I remember seeing certain bits of research where they would test specific antioxidants. And I think it might have been in supplemental form where they give high amounts of vitamin E or they give high amounts of vitamin C or different types, but just one. And it would normally be that people would end up getting worse results or worse outcomes. Do you know what I'm talking about? And if that's the case, like, do you know why that would be happening?
I don't know the specific study that you're talking about. There's lots of studies on antioxidant research, and some of them are promising, some of them are not, and some of them were disappointing.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, so there are definitely multiple examples of what you're talking about out there. It's what you really have is you have a large body of conflicting evidence. What you could say as a general principle to explain findings like that is that you let's take so I guess, like, in order to explain this at any detail, or in order to make any sense of this, we need to explain some things, look at an example and explain it in some more detail. So let's take a look at vitamin E. Vitamin E's role is to protect lipids in cell membranes from oxidizing in a chain reaction that would destroy the cell membrane. So if we imagine an oxidant that reaches a cellular membrane, it has a chance that it could interact with a polyunsaturated fatty acid, which is a particular subclass of fatty acids that are uniquely vulnerable to lipid peroxidation. If that oxidant oxidizes that polyunsaturated fatty acid, we'll abbreviate that as PUFA because it's easier to say, then if there were no vitamin E in the membrane, that PUFA would oxidize another PUFA and would oxidize another PUFA, which would oxidize another PUFA, which would oxidize another PUFA, and you'd have what's called a lipid peroxidation chain reaction, and you could destroy the whole cellular membrane. What vitamin E does is, as soon as one PUFA is oxidized, it comes in and says, hey, look at me. Look, take my electron, oxidize me. I'll sacrifice myself so you don't have to go around oxidizing other PUFAs. And so vitamin E sacrifices itself in order to prevent that lipid peroxidation chain reaction. But the only reason that has any value is because vitamin E then places the burden of let's see how trying to think of how to best explain this. Okay. So each time something is oxidized, what it's doing is it's giving up an electron. Okay. It has to take an electron from somewhere else. So the reason that vitamin E is helpful in that situation is because it then takes the burden of supplying that electron out of the membrane and places it on vitamin C. Vitamin C then takes that burden of supplying the electron and ultimately places it on the system of energy metabolism. So if you imagine what vitamin E is doing there, its value is not contained in the fact that it initially sacrificed itself. Because if vitamin E didn't then pass on the burden to supply that electron to vitamin C, it would have just taken it from one of the other thousands of PUFAs in the cellular membrane, and then it wouldn't have done anything above and beyond what would have happened had it not been there in the first place. And it would have just been the agent that passed on the burden of supplying that electron to other PUFAs in the membrane. So if an oxidant reaches the membrane and then you have a cascade of one PUFA oxidizing another, or you have a cascade of one PUFA oxidizing vitamin E and then oxidizing another PUFA and then oxidizing another, then in both of those cases you get a lipid peroxidation chain reaction.
Yeah. The
The only reason vitamin E has any value is because it takes that burden out of the membrane and places it on vitamin C. So if you imagine that the problem for someone, let's take someone who's a smoker. A smoker has this problem of accelerated vitamin E turnover because they have this greater supply of oxidants. Well, you can intervene and give the smoker more vitamin C, and that will actually help normalize the rate of vitamin E disappearance, because you're allowing the vitamin C to continue recycling that vitamin E at a quicker rate. Let's say you didn't replete the vitamin C and you just add vitamin E to the system. Well, if your problem is that all your vitamin E is oxidizing and it's not being recycled fast enough, then if you just add vitamin E to the system, then maybe you're actually going to make things worse, because you're just accelerating, you're just adding more fuel to the fire of all this vitamin E that's oxidizing and not being recycled.
Yeah.
So in that case, what you'd have to, in the person's need might actually be for vitamin C. So one of the problems in looking at studies of adding individual components to the system is that if you're not supporting the ability to recycle that, or you're not supporting all the other things that interact with that and synergize with that, sometimes you're just adding more fuel to the fire rather than actually fixing a problem.
So, I mean, that was a fantastic explanation about all that. But one of the things I'm thinking then, is it useful for someone to be taking antioxidants as a supplement? And if they are, do they have to be just taking a real broad spectrum, or should they be now instead getting that from their diet by eating more fruits and vegetables and whole foods and that kind of thing?
I think that it's always better to get your nutrients from foods. And that's for a few reasons, but the number one reason is that foods are much more complex than whatever your model of what nutrition looks like.
Yeah.
And so by getting things from food, you're getting all the other stuff that comes with it. And that hedges against a human error on your part because you didn't understand all the complexity adequately enough. And I think that when you're thinking about antioxidants, you really want to nourish all the different parts of the system. And like I was saying before, that means getting B vitamins, and that means, getting a robust metabolic rate, and that means getting enough protein. It doesn't just mean vitamin E and vitamin C.
Yeah.
So I think that it's too complex to try to take an antioxidant cocktail that's actually covering all those bases. You're covering those bases much better if you eat a well-rounded, nutrient-dense diet that doesn't unnecessarily restrict any particular food groups and gets a diversity of green leafy vegetables, fruits, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, includes, when you're getting animal products, eating nose to tail, including collagenous proteins like bone broths, including organ meats and stuff like that. When you have a really broad approach like that, you are hitting all those bases without micromanaging it, because you're getting the diversity of foods that's going to include the diversity of nutrients necessary to nourish that system. I think then if on top of that you have a problem in an individual person, then sometimes it does make sense to look at supplements. But I think you want to do that in a targeted basis and use the supplements because you have a rationale for it. You should never use supplements as your first line of defense for good nutrition.
Yeah, definitely. So look, Chris, I'm loving everything you have to say, but I'm also conscious of the time. So where can people go to find out more about you? I know you mentioned it at the start, but just give places that people can be getting more information. And if there's anything that you have that's either coming up at the moment or anything you want to promote, then please feel free to do so.
For sure. Chris Masterjohn, PhD.com is the center for all of my information. I have a podcast called The Daily Lipid that people can find in their favorite podcast app, but also you can just go to my site, click on podcast, and you'll find it there. On Monday and Wednesday, I have ongoing series of video lessons broadcast on YouTube and Facebook called Master Class with Masterjohn, where I talk about the antioxidant defense system. If anyone's listening to anything in here and it went over their head a little bit, starting from the first video in that series will give you a very good a very good introduction to the system from the ground up in a very intelligible way. For people who don't want that kind of technical information, I have Chris Masterjohn Lite, which comes out on Tuesdays and Thursdays on YouTube and Facebook. That's just 2 to 5 minute videos that aren't technical at all, and they're just quick practical tips of things you can do to improve your health. And again, if you're not on YouTube or you're not on Facebook, you can easily access that through my site. The Masterclass with Masterjohn comes out at chrismasterjohnphd.com/masterclass. And the Chris Masterjohn Lite comes out at chrismasterjohnphd.com/lite, spelled L-I-T-E, not L-I-G-H-T. But if you just go to the front page of my site and start clicking, you'll find all that stuff really easily. I'm also on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. And I have an email list that people can join at chrismasterjohnphd.com/newsletter. And yeah, from there, I got a lot of content coming out on a regular basis. So there's, people can follow it all, or they can pick whatever channel they like best and follow me on the one that they like.
Perfect. Well, look, I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes. And I will say there's lots of people I follow online. Chris's stuff is probably the only person who I've listened to every podcast. I listen to all of the stuff that he puts out because it is really good, high quality. So I suggest that you do the same. So thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing all of that knowledge. It was amazing.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.